I am joined today by the wonderful Teri Thomas. How are you?
I'm good, Jem. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. I have set us both a challenge today, which is to stick to my usual 30-minute recording. Are you up for that
Well,
challenge?
I'm up for the challenge. I can't say that I'll complete it, but I'm up for it. I will do my very best to stick within
Good,
30 minutes for sure.
good, good, good. Now, for those of you that don't know Terry is the founder of Beyond and Co, which is a brand new business which basically helps individuals find their personal brand and sort of bring that to life. Terry, tell me a little bit more about it.
So basically, I've worked for the last 15, nearly 20, if I'm being completely honest, years in marketing and communications for some really big businesses. So businesses like JP Morgan, Experian, Reckitt Benckiser. And essentially, when I left corporate life in November last year, I decided to delve into what I found joy from, which was really helping leaders to gain visibility, traction, and to use all of those great things to basically build business momentum and drive growth, revenue, etc. And to build a business out of it. So earlier this year, starting the business with my first client in January, I started Beyond and Co. So yeah, it is still a bit of a baby, but it's gaining momentum, which is great. And I'm really enjoying what I do, which is an awesome feeling after 15, 20 years working for other people.
Yeah, and I it's amazing that you found joy from this, but do you think that actually your experience from working for brands like JP Morgan and Experience, they've actually shaped your approach to sort of storytelling and brand strategy? Because that is a skill.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think a lot about this question because I get asked it a lot by potential clients. And I think ultimately, like when I started working for JP Morgan, I had never worked in financial services before. So I'd always worked in fast moving consumer goods type companies where they were incredibly entrepreneurial, very fast moving, as the name suggests, and basically always thinking kind of customer first. Whereas when I worked for JP Morgan, it was very much a B2B type business. We didn't have a chase arm of the business in Sydney where I was working. And so basically, I was having to take really complex kind of products, services, highly regulated products and services in finance and distill them into very clear, concise messages. But outside of that, I had never understood these products and services previously. So it was a bit of a learning curve for me, because I was like, well, I've got to understand this in order to convey these messages, which ended up being a bit of a blessing and a curse because I could ask all the sort of dumb questions to make sure that I really understood what we were looking to deliver. But that also meant that it really helped me to simplify things for our clients. And ultimately, I've always been a huge storyteller, hence your comments about sticking to time. And I believe that when you tell a good story, it helps people to really resonate with you and your brand. And ultimately, that's what I took into JP. And when I left, it was one of the things that I was most proud of, that I'd got them to think a bit differently about how they sold their products and services to clients. And that's always obviously really informed the way that I've put together the business around Beyond and Co as well. So yeah, definitely helps me to tell people stories, I guess.
Love that so much. And I completely agree with you. When you're wearing a communications hat, there is no such thing as a silly question. And it's actually our job to ask those silly questions because you can guarantee that someone will be thinking of it somewhere.
I
And
think
that is how
so,
you get all the information.
definitely. And
Yeah.
I think also it's a real blessing of ours, the fact that, can you really dumb this down for me? Pretend I completely don't understand. There's obviously instances where I definitely don't understand and I'm trying to understand, but no one's ever going to get annoyed with you for saying that you don't get something. And I think that
Yeah.
that's a really important thing to remember, especially when you're in the early stages of your career or a new job.
Yeah. And it definitely helps when you have to write to a reading age of 9 or 11 or whatever the national standard is at this point. It's actually really helpful to not know.
Exactly. I think so.
So, in terms of personal brand, what do we mean by that?
So if you Google it, One, personal brand is hugely on the rise in terms of Google searches. I can't remember what the latest statistic is, but it is huge. You used to be something very much US centric, and
Yeah.
obviously is now becoming more and more prevalent here in the UK, which is great for me and other businesses that specialize in it. Ultimately, I think really it's the intentional shaping of your narrative is the easiest way to say it. And what I mean by that is you have a personal brand whether you are cultivating it or not. People know who you are, they recognize you to varying degrees, obviously, and you have a reputation that precedes you. And when you work in business and when you are intrinsically tied to your business, if we think about all of those small to medium sized businesses, founders, leaders that are obviously trying to grow their visibility, you need to really be investing time in this space because otherwise it's a completely underutilized resource. So when I talk about personal brand with people, I ultimately say it is a marketing asset that you need to cultivate. But luckily for you, it's completely down to you how you do that. And you need to make sure that you are doing it authentically to you because lots of people will tell you how to do it. But ultimately, if you're not doing it in a way that feels comfortable to you, you're never going to feel confident to do it yourself.
I'm really glad you use that word authentic because too often I've come across a leader who states that they are one thing, but their personality traits and their behaviors are completely the opposite to what
Yeah,
they're trying to portray. So when you're talking about personal brand, it's an it's a growth and an evolution of who you are naturally to your core. It has to be genuine.
exactly. And you've got to move past the sort of the visualization of it. It's not just kind of like beautiful branding and lots of great graphics or kind of like sound bites with a filter and lots of editing. I kind of think of it as, when you're dating, you go on a date with somebody and you have a really bad experience, or they're rude to the waiter, or they don't say thank you to the guy at the cinema that's just giving you your tickets. You're unlikely, or I'm unlikely, to go on a second date with that person. And that's what you're creating every time. It's not just about kind of being on social media and portraying an image. It's about how you're showing up in the morning sales meeting, or how you mentor the junior member of your team, or as a leader, when you walk on stage and you've delivered your, really powerful investor relations, investor day speech, that you walk off and say thank you to the team that helped you to write your speech notes. It's all of that stuff, right? And so many people don't see that behind the scenes stuff and think that it's just this kind of vanity, I don't know, branding that sits around you, that really is about visuals and, polished photography and social media. And it really isn't. Or, at Beyond and Co, that's not what it's about. That's not what I'm trying to instill in the people that I work with and the people that, want to work with us.
Yeah, I think that's a misconception with marketing in general. They focus on the visuals, but actually it's your tone of voice. It is what you want to be known for. It's how you want to lead. It's everything all together in one juicy package. It's not just visuals on social media.
Exactly. I like that. Juicy package. We all want to be
Yeah.
a juicy package, Jem. I
Love
love
it, love
that.
it.
That's the sound bite of the podcast so far.
Find your juicy package for sure.
Find your juicy package, everyone.
Yeah. So what is your sort of standard operating procedure then when you work with a leader? How do you sort of understand who they are authentically to be able to build their brand?
Yeah, so this is really like kind of where you invest a lot of time with that person. And I think that's really where their investment sits, right? This isn't a kind of quick win. And I talk to my clients or prospective clients a lot about this because ultimately I need to really understand who that person is, what makes them tick, what gives them joy, and also understand that sometimes when I ask these questions, it might not be what they're telling me either.
Yeah.
And I've got some. I can give you an example of that in a sec. But ultimately, I call that phase discovery. So when we're looking at personal branding, it's really kind of getting under the bonnet of the person, really understanding them, their experiences, their lived experiences in and outside of work, what they want to be known for, if they're currently known for those things, where they're, to coin the phrase show up. I don't really like using it, but like,
Yeah.
where they're currently visible within the ecosystem of all the places they could be. Are they sharing their messages, and are those messages landing in the right way in those particular places? Also do a bit of kind of competitor analysis depending on how extensive that leader is, and how, what their kind of aspirations are
Yeah.
in terms of competitive advantage. And then we go through a kind of definition phase. So we work out what their kind of core messaging is, what their thought leadership pillars are. And what I mean by thought leadership pillars, for anybody that doesn't sort of work in marketing, you know, what value they can create for their audience, and how we put that forward to their audience. So it might be, Jem is an amazing communicator and has lots of like golden nuggets around her experience of, like, I recently watched your social media video about like burying the lead in an email when you're talking to somebody and wanting them to like really take notice of your call to action. These would be thought leadership pillars for Jen, for example. Or like
Yeah.
thought leadership pillars for me might be, I'm a new business owner, like what am I learning throughout that process? Or I'm on a podcast today, what did I do to prepare, which I wrote a LinkedIn post about. Then you kind of build. So you've got discovery and define, which a lot of time is spent there. A lot of time is spent by me with the executive or leader in that time. Then you really start building out like what that calendar of content looks like. Which journalists do we need to talk to? How can I get my client in front of those journalists? Do we invite them to have an off the record conversation? Or, do we make sure that we're turning up at events that they're covering, or try and get speaker spots in conferences that they cover as a media partner, for example? We're sharing extra press releases with them, so that when they write an article next time, they're like, oh yeah, I know Simone, one of my clients, can talk authoritatively about investment banking. How do we get her involved in this article when we're talking about XYZ? So that's kind of the build phase. And then the final phase is the amplification phase, which is really where we, drill down into the metrics, what's working, what's not working, how do we pivot. This is typically where I would work with a client on an ongoing basis. So we're
Yeah.
managing their profile, their presence, what they're known for. We're pivoting. They may have never had the aspiration of creating an ebook, for example, or they might have never thought that they could possibly go on stage as a TEDx speaker. But here we are with the opportunities, and how do you prepare those people for that stage? So our model, my model at Beyond & Co, is 4 stages. So discovery, define, build, and amplify. And that obviously depending on the investment of the client is, delivered at varying degrees. But ultimately, from a personal brand perspective, I would like to be taking my clients through all 4 of those processes to really get out the most from the experience of working together to
Yeah.
build and maintain their personal brand.
Love that. And I love the pivot angle, because
Yeah,
that's actually one of the hardest things to do when you have sort of a plan and you're going forward in this plan. When you look at the analysis and you go, that's working, that's not working as well, let's go down this route. That shift in direction can be quite challenging for people. So you actually need someone to sort of give you that nudge down a different path, because we all know that leadership journeys are not linear.
exactly. And I think, that's where it's great to have experience in this space, because that's what if we look at both of our careers, have been doing throughout our career. We've been working with leaders that change their minds often, or have a client that they want to win, and then you need to augment the strategy completely versus what you'd set out 3 or 4 months ago, or
Yeah.
budget gets cut, or whatever it is, and being able to
There's
lean
never a
into the
budget,
pivot.
Terry, there's never a
I
budget.
know. Well, there is a perceived budget, but then you get there and you're like, I'd like that money that you promised me back in December, please. And they're like, what
Yeah.
money? We've spent it on something else. Um, but yeah, I mean, the pivot is real. And also, people get a bit of an appetite for this stuff. I talked about it a few weeks ago on my LinkedIn. I never thought I would be a podcast guest, and here I am on my second podcast. And I quite enjoy them. So
Yeah.
all of these executives that turn up to me and they're like, oh no, I don't want to do podcasts. I don't want to do video. I'm like, just wait. It's a bit of a bug. You do get used to it. It's quite nice to do it. It's nice to have a chat with somebody and then see what people think of it.
Yeah.
Um, So yeah, pivoting in the positive direction as well as changing your strategy.
Love that. Love that. So who is your ideal client? Who do you want to work with? Who comes to you?
So like so I've got kind of three client personas that I'm really going after, if that's
Yeah,
really what we're asking.
she's on the attack.
Um,
Let's go.
yeah, exactly. Who we attack when we're out and about. And really it's kind of following the sort of, the Daniel Priestley bronze, silver, gold
Yeah.
method. So I have had quite a few executives that have come to me that need, and I call them rising leaders. And these are people that might need kind of short-term advice, support, tactics to help them deliver something. So an example of that might be I'd worked with an amazing lady when I was at JP Morgan, and she still works at JP Morgan, so I won't say who she is. But she was worried a few months ago that her role might be made redundant. And she reached out to me and she was like, Teri, I'm getting a bit worried about this. You and I have always worked really well together. What do you think I should be doing? And I was like, look, well, what's your biggest fear? Anyway, we sort of, brainstormed and talked about that just together. And ultimately, we decided that it would make her feel more powerful, more confident to have a refreshed LinkedIn profile, to be more active on LinkedIn. But ultimately, where we were trying to get to is a demonstration of her value that she would be able to articulate both internally and externally. So everybody else, it's like a LinkedIn profile refresh. This isn't necessarily exactly what I want to be doing all of the time, obviously. However, what that delivered for her was the articulation of her value. So when she was talking to me about what she did in her day to day, her assumption, put the light on because it's all of a sudden gone dark outside. Her assumption was that people knew what she was doing and therefore she didn't need to talk about it. And I was
Yeah.
like, but do they know the ins and outs of what you're doing, all your extracurriculars, your volunteering, etc.? So we built all of that out. We updated her LinkedIn profile, and she went away with a refreshed platform in order to share her thought leadership and be visible. She's remained at JP Morgan, which is obviously awesome. And she knows that if she does get into a situation where she needs to articulate her value externally to recruiters or other businesses, that she's ready with those messages, which is amazing. It might also be like tactical stuff around a product launch or a service delivery, or they've got an upcoming speaker engagement and they just need somebody that kind of knows what they're doing to help them shape their narrative and then deliver those speaking points without all of the oohs and ahs and ums that come with
Yeah.
being sort of naturally nervous in a situation. Then you've got kind of the transitioning leader. So that might be somebody that's held like a corporate role for a really long time, that started a new business, someone like me, or somebody that's kind of, relatively senior that's looking to have like directorships or non-executive directorships, that is potentially moving into NGO work as opposed to kind of, corporate life, or people that are sort of transitioning and doing a bit of a career pivot. And they tend to go through more of the 4-step process that I just outlined. And then we get to the end and I ongoingly manage with them their personal
Mm.
brand and profile. And then the kind of golden ticket, the clients that I would like to have more of, are founders and entrepreneurs that have scaling businesses. So these might be people that started out and they're kind of like, you know, scrambling around a little bit initially because they're an operations person or a technology person and they know their product inside out and they've started to deliver it really well to clients. But now they're trying to kind of market and sell and
Well,
articulate what they've been doing for
yeah.
however long. And that doesn't come naturally to them. They need some support in that space. And they also need a bit of a wraparound service for their broader brand of their business. And I'm talking to several of those at the moment. Or they might have, you know, businesses that are doing really, really well, but now with the prevalence of personal branding, realize they could, knock the ball out of the park if they're also using themselves as a marketing asset in a very broad marketing mix. So they're kind of the three key ones. And then outside of that, you also get people that need, executive coaching, business coaching and strategy, and those types of people that kind of, know me by reputation or, through my personal branding, that are like, actually, Tess, we need some help with this. Can you, is this something you can help with? Or can you put us in touch with a partner that you work with to help us to shape our web content creation or whatever. And then
Yeah.
we kind of sit around that as a bit of a satellite strategy service as well.
Amazing. How cool. I want to touch on the point you made because that was a really good example about LinkedIn. And
Yeah,
I see this far too often. Like LinkedIn is a personal social media platform. There are obviously business pages, but when you are promoting, you need to do it through the lens of your leadership rather than your organization, because you are then sort of boxing yourself within an organization. So when you're looking at things like recruitment, you're doing yourself a disservice by only promoting the stuff that you're doing through work rather than what you're doing as a leader. And
yeah,
I see that a lot. And then I struggle to find out who that person is. So if they're
yeah. I
talking,
think
under one organization, and then if they get a new job, they're then talking under the brand of the new organization. And while that is great and that shows dedication and growth for the organization, it doesn't show me who you are as a leader. And I see that a lot on LinkedIn.
yeah, I think it's such an important point, and I've definitely been guilty of this as well. And I think, I have a lot of clients that work in and around professional services. And I think people get quite nervous. If you're not starting a business for the first time, you think about all the people that like we meet networking and stuff, Jim. A
Yeah.
lot of them are starting their own businesses. So they're utilizing LinkedIn to kind of get the word out. Whereas quite a lot of the clients that come to me, especially in that kind of like rising leader space, are already working with fantastic brand names in and amongst organizations with fantastic brand names, I should say,
Mm.
but they don't know how to have their own personal brand
Yeah.
outside of the company's brand. And when I worked at JP Morgan, I would post a lot about what JP Morgan was doing, obviously as a marketing and communicator, like what we were doing, help to drive programs of work and campaigns that we were looking to deliver. And I advised the people that I was working with to do the same. But I very rarely talked about my understanding of marketing and communications, or the importance of personal brand, or things that interested me outside of my day-to-day work. And I think the point that you make is incredibly important, because if we think about how many times people change their career, I was at JP Morgan for 9 years. That's a
Yeah.
long time. And I transitioned through promotions within that time, which was great. So I had different experiences of working with different people. But if you're in the same job for 2 or 3 years, a lot of people look to then move on. And to
Yeah.
your point, they've not built their own credibility, their own branding on a platform that is completely free to use
Yes.
and available 24/7, 365 days of the year, and they're not utilizing that as a platform for themselves. And
Yeah.
I think that that is a real miss, and something that we should talk more about. You're giving me ideas here. We should talk more about it. That if you're working in an organization, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be using LinkedIn regularly yourself. Actually, I've seen some great people. I've got a friend of a friend. His name's Dominic McWilliam, if anybody wants to check him out. But basically, he works for the equivalent, and I can't remember the name of his company off the top of my head. He's going to kill me because I could have given him a plug. But he works for a company, the equivalent of Amex. So they basically reward their business clients with points that mean
Yeah.
prizes. And essentially, he works in their sales team. So nothing to do with marketing, or some to do with marketing, but he's not a marketer by trade. And he had posted nearly every day when he started his job. And I asked him when we met for coffee recently, it's just a mate, how have you got to 10,000 followers? And he was like, I literally just posted every single day
Yeah.
for a year when I started my job. And he consistently showed up, and he made his company's content and the things that he was learning accessible to people that were following him. And he
Yeah.
added value to them. And he's working there, like he's now got lots of opportunities off the back of his LinkedIn presence, because, the company will have also realized that
Yeah.
he is an amazing brand ambassador. And if your employees are sharing your messages authentically on social media, there's lots of stats that I can throw in and share with you around that. He is a major asset to them. And that is a two-way asset in terms of his employability at that organization. So,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly,
a
exactly. But I think
long-winded
people are
way to say
scared.
that you're absolutely right, Jen.
I think people naturally shy away from promoting themselves. It's so much easier to promote your company, your organization. It's I, like you say, brand is big in the USA, but they're also very big on self-promotion. They do not shy away from demonstrating their ability. And, some people might see it as showing off. I see it as just demonstrating how amazing they are. And I think we need to get better at that. We should be shouting from the rooftops about the things that we've achieved and what we've done. And I want to see more of it because, like you say, it helps your career and it helps the organization.
I think so. And I think controversially, I do think that there is a bit of a balance with that. That is like, so I've posted recently about self promotion versus value creation. And I think quite often people sort of misinterpret what it is that they like, how to articulate the messages they want to share. And what I mean by self promotion might be, you know, I recently, a very basic example, because I don't want to give specifics, but might be like, I attended this event and I saw all of these people. Okay, so the vanity metric here is you've tagged all of the people that you've met. The
Hmm.
event sponsor or the event owner is really happy that you're obviously posting about said event, and any charity partners and things are also obviously being like lit up in lights amongst your post. However, anybody outside of the people that actually attended that event may like your post potentially because there's a lovely picture of you and you're with your mates and they know a few of the people in the pictures, but you're not actually adding any value to that person as they scroll through their feed on LinkedIn. Versus, I was looking, and I do obviously spend a lot of time on social media as research for my job. I saw one of the founders of Find Your Click, which is a networking and community building organization in London. And she has recently been to like a creators retreat. People like Daniel Priestley presented there, and she shared her kind of top 10 findings from this event. And I automatically set up as somebody that like follows this leader and thought, this is interesting to me. I want to know what she learned because I wasn't at this event. So,
Hmm.
sort of shifting from the self promotion of, look at me, I'm getting out and about, I'm networking with all the right people, to, yes, I'm out and about and I'm networking, but actually, these are some of the things that I learned that might actually be useful for you, Teri and Jem, is a very different style of post. And I think if more people thought about what value they could create for their audience, followers, contacts, one, they would probably feel more comfortable posting because it's not
Yeah.
all about them. And
Yeah.
two, they probably get the right level of engagement and not just kind of vanity metrics around likes, which a lot of people chase, but in my view, isn't the be all and end all.
Yeah. It's the cause and effect, isn't it?
Yeah,
If you've won an award, that's great. That's the effect. But the cause was actually all of the leadership work that went into it, and actually talking about that more than the award will then open up people's insight and they can learn something from it and develop their own leadership skills. So yeah, completely agree. Nice. So why do you think personal branding is growing in the UK?
I think there's a few things. I think kind of trust in terms of companies and CEOs is actually down. If you look at things like Edelman's Trust Barometer, I think I think it was like 92% of people trust individual recommendations over corporate messages. So when you think about building your own trust and credibility and that of your team members, people are going to take far more notice of you, Jem, than they ever would of the company that you're currently representing. And I see this on my own channels, right? I've started a Beyond & Co LinkedIn page, a Beyond & Co Instagram page when I started the business. I get far more engagement and visibility on Teri Thomas than I ever do on Beyond & Co, but
Yeah.
I am intrinsically linked to that company. And I think Daniel Priestley recently said in one of his like amazing webinars, and if you haven't checked them out, you definitely should, anybody that's listening, because he offers them for free and there's so many like amazing nuggets in them. But he was basically saying that you could go in as a business founder and start a LinkedIn page exactly the same day, posting exactly the same content as your company page, and your personal profile will get 20% more engagement and visibility than your company page. And
Yeah.
that is really because human beings, people buy from people. People trust in people. People like to make relationships with people. Yes, of course, amazing brands like JP Morgan, Marks and Spencer's, McDonald's, their brands precede them, but it's taken a really long time to build up that trust and credibility within that company. You think about people like Stephen Bartlett, Diary of the CEO, or Richard Branson, and how many more, like hundreds, millions of thousands more followers they have as individuals versus the company. This obviously like really compounds that point. And I think that in an environment that's really like busy with content and information, if you have somebody that you like and trust that you're following on LinkedIn, Instagram, that you've met at an event, that you've watched their podcast, that you know, shared wines with, if you've got something that you need to ask that you know that that person can share insights on, you're much more likely to go to that person than you ever are to Google something and get streams and streams of information, or even use Chat GPT or whatever, which obviously culminates, you know, brings a lot of information together. Amazing tools, but I personally would still rather speak to a human.
Yes.
um, and it's the same in sales. So if you're not cultivating your personal brand currently, you will get left behind in an environment that is becoming noisier and noisier and is becoming more and more AI driven. So I, you know, like talk a lot about this. I've actually got a second podcast recording, and the guy that I'm going to be talking to is really big on AI and AI optimization, AIO, I think he calls it. But basically how someone searches for a solution and whether you are top of mind for ChatGPT, Perplexity, etc. But unless you're kind of getting out there, you're not going to be top of the search engine. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a two-pronged, you know, you need to have a digital presence as well as an authentic in real life presence, as we talked about earlier, in order to be driving your personal brand. And if you're not doing that as a founder of a business, then you're leaving a lot of value on the table, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think there's an element of how people like to work as well these days. When you think sort of historically, it used to be that leaders were the biggest, strongest, toughest person, and they would sort of be that leader. And then we sort of evolved, and then it was the person who was deemed the cleverest. And I
Yeah.
think now we've moved on to a place where actually we're sort of leading with the heart and we go from that compassionate side. And when people are looking at either employment or someone to work with or buy from, like you say, we're pulling on that emotion, but that compassionate leadership shines through far more now than it ever did. So I think every leader has a responsibility to genuinely work on their leadership and constantly evolve to suit the needs of their employees as well.
I think that's a really important point, and I used to see it a lot with male leaders, especially. You know, they wanted to be, you know, like fathers of three girls. Like one of the CEOs that I used to work with got quite emotional in a charity meeting once and profusely apologized to me for being emotional in this meeting. And I said to him, I was like, I would much rather that you were yourself and vulnerable than ever need, you know, ever felt that you needed to put on a persona in front of me. And I think that, to your point, Jem, I think, you know, COVID was a huge game changer. I think the leaders that stood out post COVID were really the ones that lent into their own vulnerabilities, things that they were struggling with. They were a lot more empathetic towards their employees. They understood the challenges of, you know, everyday life, you know, raising tiny humans, caring for elderly relatives. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard. And you're not going to go in and put the extra mile into your work and your organization unless you fundamentally believe in it anymore. And I think people are kind of, you know, wanting to reshape that, and therefore leaders are reshaping how they lead their people to counterbalance it. And I
Yeah.
think, to be honest, as a, you know, self-proclaimed radiator, I think there's nothing more important than that. And in the early stages of my career, I was told often, you know, not to be the warm and fluffy one, you know, that the perceived value of me would shrink because I was personable, bubbly, invested a lot of time in getting to know the leaders that I was working with. And actually now I kind of, you know, it's not for a podcast phrasing, but I kind of say, you know, well, screw you. Like that
Yeah.
actually, that is not the case at all. People want to work with people that they like and trust and enjoy working with. And I would much rather be that person than the person that's like towing the line or
Yeah.
not sharing themselves authentically. So yeah, I think COVID was nothing but great for leaders, for good, warm leaders. And Jacinda Ardern,
Yeah.
amazing leader.
Yeah, so true. Right, now I always end by asking a final question. And I think for you, for anyone that is sort of starting to think about their personal brand, what is one action that they can take instantly this week to start working towards that, other than reaching out to Beyond and Co?
Other than, yeah. Thanks for that, Jim. Look, I think it's all about being reflective and thinking about what you actually want to get out of it. If you want to be visible, then I would write down all of the places that you're currently visible, and I would leave no stone unturned. So I'd be thinking about like you give an update in the team meeting every Monday morning. You're a member of the Pride group at work, or you volunteer and are a coach for your son's football team. Then I would be thinking about, or your little girl's football team. I should say that was bad of me. And I think about all the different places that you're visible, and then I would think about all of the places you'd like to be visible and look at those gaps. And I guess it's kind of like one thing, but in three parts. And then the final thing is I would be thinking about how can I be more visible in the places that I want to, and what do I need to do in order to do that? If you've got big aspirations of like speaking on stage somewhere or having your own book, or but you've never ever written a blog post, or you don't post regularly on LinkedIn, they're small steps that you can make in order to feel more comfortable being visible. And the more comfortable you feel in being visible, the more opportunities will come to you, and the right opportunities at that. So that would be my kind of you know reflective takeaway. And if you can think about that, start researching the people that are doing it great and follow what they're doing and copy it a little bit with your unique spin on it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you
Loved
for having
it.
me.
I think we're on time.
Oh,
Just
amazing.
maybe.
Hurrah!